Hello there. Wherever you are, however you found yourself listening to this, you're very welcome. There's no need to sit up straight, no pressure to focus, and no urgency to understand. You're here for a story, a very soft, very slow, very uneventful story. And tonight's tale is about a war. But not just any war. This is the story of the Pig War of 1859. Now, that might sound like a joke. You might think, a war about a pig? And yes, the Pig War of 1859 was, in fact, a real historical event. But don't worry. It wasn't a loud war. It wasn't a dangerous war. In fact, you might say it was the most peaceful war in history. There were no rushing armies, no roaring cannons, no battlefield cries or clashing swords, no heroic charges, not even a single human casualty, no shots fired, well, except for one. But we'll get to that, slowly. Tonight, we'll settle into the soft, quiet tale of a war that started with a pig. Just a pig, wandering into a garden on a sleepy island. And somehow, that pig almost caused a war between two of the most powerful nations in the 19th century, Britain and the United States. And yet, as with many things in life, not much actually happened, and that's just fine. In this boundary crisis between the US and Britain, there were debates, there were letters, there were tents set up and then left standing, quietly. There were officers sipping tea, there were clouds slowly passing over the sea, and there were soldiers waiting. Waiting and waiting. The dispute over San Juan Island moved at the pace of moss growing on a stone, a true uneventful military standoff. And the pig that almost caused a war, never knew the chaos it had almost started. So settle in. Get comfortable. Let your shoulders drop. There's no rush here. There's nothing urgent. You don't have to remember dates. You don't need to recall names. This story unfolds slowly, softly, steadily. And so, in the year 1859, as the world turned quietly, and as the sea gently rocked around a small patch of land called San Juan Island, a pig wandered into a garden. And history kind of, sort of, maybe, almost happened. This was the Pig War of 1859. Now, if you're still awake, you might like to know a little more. Not too much, of course, just a little. Just enough to let the mind gently drift. San Juan Island, you see, was a peaceful place. Grassy fields, low hills, cloudy skies. It sat between Vancouver Island and the mainland of what is now Washington State. A beautiful but sleepy little spot. But back then, it wasn't entirely clear who owned it. Was it British? Was it American? Even the maps disagreed. And so began the dispute over San Juan Island. A slow disagreement, a confusing map or two, some very patient British officers, some very calm Americans, and, eventually, a very unfortunate pig. And this truly slow, truly quiet moment in history became the Pig War of 1859. A tale of almost war, of no real battles, of soldiers politely waiting, of negotiations that stretched across oceans and months, of a no-shots-fired war, unless you count that one small gun, which was aimed at a pig. This, dear listener, is a history made for bedtime. A history of boredom. A story where, day after day, the fog rolled in and rolled back out again. Where tea was brewed, where letters were written, where nothing much changed. And as you listen, you may find that the details begin to blur, that the names slip gently from your memory, that the passage of time slows just a little, that your breath grows softer, and your thoughts more distant. That's the idea. So don't worry if you doze off. The pig doesn't mind. The British and American troops certainly didn't hurry. This was, after all, the most peaceful war in history. And it all started, believe it or not, when a pig found a potato in the wrong garden. So let's begin, slowly, quietly, softly, with the land, the sky, the island, and the pig. Let us now drift back to 1859, to overcast skies, to calm tides, and to a curious creature with no knowledge of borders. This is the beginning of a story where nothing truly urgent occurred, and that's why it's perfect for sleep. Let us begin, not with a battle, but with a place.
1859. The air is cool. The sea is calm. And there, quietly nestled between the green coasts of Vancouver Island and the young United States territory of Washington, lies San Juan Island. San Juan Island, the very heart of the Pig War of 1859. A place both the British and the Americans believed might be theirs, though neither seemed quite sure. And neither seemed especially eager to find out. You see, San Juan Island was not large. It was not grand. It held no gold, no cities, no great strategic power. It was just there. Grassy meadows stretched lazily along its soft slopes. A few windswept trees leaned ever so slightly against the Pacific breeze. The skies, often gray, were never in a hurry to clear. And in the mornings, a fine mist would hang in the air, like a veil of sleep that refused to lift. It was the kind of place where the sun rose slowly and set even slower. A quiet land for a quiet story. And truly, the most peaceful war in history could only have happened here. There were British settlers and American ones, farmers mostly. A few Hudson's Bay Company men on one side, and on the other, American homesteaders with potato gardens and low fences. Not too many of them, really, just enough to notice when a pig wandered where it shouldn't. This island, so green, so slow, so still, was the center of a boundary crisis between the U.S. and Britain. A cartographer's puzzle. The maps drawn years before had left a little room for error. A few lines that didn't quite agree, and no one had rushed to solve it. For years, both sides lived there, quietly. Together, but not exactly. Near, but not united. Still, there was no tension to speak of, no shouting, no urgency. Just a long, slow standoff, with no standoff at all. Until, one day, a pig. Yes, the pig. The pig that almost caused a war. But we're not there yet. Let's stay here a while longer, on San Juan Island, where time passed gently, where birds glided quietly over cool water, where sheep grazed and clouds drifted. The British, stationed nearby at Vancouver Island, claimed the island as theirs. The Americans, on the mainland, sighed differently, but neither made too much noise about it. They had other things to do. And San Juan Island was, after all, just an island. Green, grassy, sleepy. Still, both sent settlers. And those settlers brought their lives with them. Hammers tapping, sheep bleating, children playing by the shore. And once in a while, a pig or two. It's important to understand just how little happened here, because the Pig War of 1859 is not a story of explosions. It is a story of sighs, and long glances, and tea that grew cold on an officer's desk before it was finished. It is a story of letters written, letters read, and letters forgotten. It is a tale of overcast skies, muddy boots, and fog that rolled in from the coast, only to settle in again the next day. This was, in every sense, an uneventful military standoff. But even uneventful stories must begin somewhere. And this one begins on soft soil, beneath cloudy skies, on San Juan Island. So remember the name, not because you must, but because it will drift softly through this entire tale, like the wind through the tall grass. San Juan Island, the site of the most peaceful war in history, a war that started with no battle plan, no declaration, no war drums, only the soft, wet sound of a pig's footsteps in a neighbor's garden. And now that we've seen the place, now that we've heard the silence, we can slowly, ever so gently, move forward to a time just before the pig appeared. Because before there was the Pig War of 1859, there was life. Regular, slow-moving life. So let's spend some time there, before the hoofprints, before the garden, before the gun, and long before anyone called it a war. Let's visit life before the dispute. Before the pig, before the garden, before the letters and flags and soldiers who did not fight, there was simply life. And it moved, as it often did in those days, softly, slowly,
Before the Pig
without
War
much
of
interruption.
1859 was quiet. On San Juan Island, time passed like fog across the water, smooth, pale, and almost still. The people who lived there, both British and American, were used to the calm. They were settlers, farmers, fishermen, traders, and above all, patient. The Hudson's Bay Company had set up a sheep farm on the island. They called it the Bellevue Sheep Farm. It was not much, really. Just some simple wooden structures, corrals for sheep, a few men with worn boots and strong hands. They were British subjects, and they believed the island was British soil. And not so far away, American homesteaders had begun to arrive too. They brought families, planted gardens, built cabins with their own hands, cutting logs, stacking stone, raising roofs plank by plank. They believed the island belonged to the United States. But in those early days, no one seemed in a hurry to decide. There was no rush. The boundary crisis between the U.S. and Britain was quiet, tucked away in the pages of distant governments and dusty maps, far from the grassy fields of San Juan. The settlers were more interested in potatoes than politics, more concerned with fences than foreign policy. And so, side by side, but not quite together, they lived. A few exchanged pleasantries. Some simply kept to themselves. There was little tension and even less urgency. The Americans grew crops. The British tended sheep. The sun rose, the mist rolled in, and the island kept its secrets beneath the low-hanging clouds. No one was marching, no one was shouting, and no one, certainly no one, was expecting a war. And yet, the ingredients were there. One island, 2 flags, and no agreement on the border. But life went on. Sheep wandered through the dewy grass. Children played near the shore, their laughter muffled by the breeze. Campfires crackled gently in the evening. And some nights, if you were very quiet, you could hear the soft low of distant cows, or the faint oink of a pig behind a wooden fence. Yes, there were pigs. Just a few, kept by an American settler named Lyman Cutler. Cutler had built his home, cleared some land, and planted potatoes, rows and rows of them. He tended them carefully, hoeing the dirt, watering the soil, watching them grow in the gray Pacific light. It was not an easy life, but it was his. And across a barely marked property line, a pig lived. A pig owned by the Hudson's Bay Company. A black pig, strong and curious. It roamed a little farther each day, sniffing, snorting, exploring. It didn't care much for borders. It had no concept of sovereignty. It knew only the scent of something delicious and the inviting softness of freshly turned soil. And so, day by day, life on San Juan Island moved forward. The British watched their sheep. The Americans tended their gardens. The pig wandered, and history waited. No one knew that soon this pig would become the pig that almost caused a war. But before that, before anyone reached for a musket, before any letters were sent, before officers boarded boats, there were simply days, ordinary days, long days, with long shadows and longer silences. This was not a land of drama. It was a place of repetition. Morning mist,
afternoon wind, evening chill, and every now and then a discussion at the trading post about weather or fences or a pig that had been seen near the potatoes again. But there was no sense of alarm, no flags raised, no lines drawn in the dirt. It was the quiet before a war that wouldn't really be a war, a no-shots-fired war, where peace was never quite broken, just nudged, softly. And so, on a day like any other, with clouds overhead and potatoes in the ground, a pig stepped across an invisible line into history. But we're not there yet. Let's pause. Let's breathe. Let's remain here in this chapter of peace. Because life before the dispute was simple.
If you listen
slow,
carefully,
still.
you can almost hear it. The rustle of leaves, the crunch of boots in soft earth, the gentle grunt of a pig nosing through a fence. This was the world before the Pig War of 1859 began, before San Juan Island became the site of an uneventful military standoff, before any officers were sent, before any soldiers waited, before anyone argued, and before that one sleepy garden became famous for reasons no one could have imagined. Let's go there now, to the garden, to the pig, to the one and only shot in a war of silence. Let us now visit the pig and the potato garden. And so, the moment approaches. Not a moment of battle, not a cry or a clash, but a simple moment of dirt and hooves and one hungry pig. The Pig War of 1859 did not begin with drums. It did not begin with politics. It began with a potato. You see, Lyman Cutler, the American settler we mentioned earlier, had worked hard on his land. He had come to San Juan Island to find peace, and perhaps a little prosperity. He cleared the brush, he dug the earth, he planted, watered, waited, and the potatoes grew. They were not the largest potatoes, not the prettiest, but they were his. His garden was not large, just a small plot really, but it was carefully kept, tended with quiet pride. And then, one day, as the overcast sky pressed gently on the hills, and a breeze curled softly through the grass, the pig came. It was, as pigs go, a curious one, a black boar, stout and clever. It belonged to the British, more precisely to the Hudson's Bay Company. And this pig, like all pigs, followed its nose. Across the meadow it wandered, past low bushes, past a worn wooden fence, until it found itself in the garden, the potato garden. And what a garden it was! The scent of fresh earth, the leaves rustling in rows, the soft yielding soil, perfect for snuffling. The pig, bless it, was delighted. And so, in a quiet moment, on an island no one could quite claim, the pig feasted. It rooted, it dug, it snorted, it grunted, and the potatoes, one by one, were gone. Cutler found the scene not long after. You might imagine he was frustrated, perhaps even angry. But here, dear listener, is where history whispers, not shouts. He did not storm the British post. He did not raise a fist. He simply fetched his rifle. And he fired. One shot, one loud crack across the still air, startling the crows, echoing over the hills. And when the sound faded, the pig lay still. No more rooting, no more grunting, just silence. This, some say, was the shot that started a war. The shot heard by almost nobody, but still a shot. And with that shot, the Pig War of 1859 had, in a way, begun. Cutler reported what had happened. He offered to pay for the pig. He admitted what he'd done. He wasn't looking for conflict, just resolution. But Charles Griffin, the British official who claimed ownership of the pig, was not satisfied. He demanded a much higher sum than Cutler believed fair.
Words were exchanged. A disagreement, small, polite, slow, began to grow. And soon, British officials were notified, then American ones. Then someone said the word outrage. Then someone else said the word sovereignty. And still others said troops. And all because
almost caused a war. A pig that now lay quiet, unaware of its fame. In the grand scheme of history, it seems absurd, and yet this one animal, this one moment, became the spark for the most peaceful war in history. There were no further shots. There was no charge, no counterattack, just confusion and caution and paperwork. The Americans, fearing British retaliation, sent soldiers, a small detachment, to protect their settlers, to assert their claim, to show something. The British responded in kind, a few warships offshore, a few men on land, more flags, more letters. And so, over the fate of one black pig and one potato garden, the two great powers of the 19th century found themselves staring across a meadow, politely from separate tents. The dispute over San Juan Island had now become a true, uneventful military standoff. But we'll get to that in time. No need to rush. Nothing truly urgent occurred. The pig was gone, but its legend had only begun. And so we pause and remember. This is how the Pig War of 1859 began. Not with conquest, not with conflict, but with a pig in a potato patch. A war with no battles, a no shots fired war, except for one. A story told softly, repeated gently, remembered fondly. As always, there was no real urgency, no real enemy, only misunderstanding, and the quiet shuffle of soldiers who had no one to fight. Let's go with them now, to the camps, to the officers, to the quiet arrival of uniforms and letters, and plans that would never be used. Let us now drift forward to British and American officers arrive. And so it was that the pig lay quiet, the garden stood ruined, and two nations turned their attention, slowly and cautiously, towards San Juan Island. There was no alarm, no urgency, but there was protocol. For the Americans, the arrival of soldiers came not with a trumpet or a rush, but with quiet steps and careful letters. A young captain, George Pickett, was sent to the island. Yes, the same George Pickett who would one day charge a hill at Gettysburg. But not today. Today he brought just 66 men. No cannons, no drums, just soldiers in uniform, and tents. They marched slowly. The boots of the men pressed softly into the damp ground. And when they reached the chosen site, they did what soldiers do when there is nothing to fight. They unpacked. They built fires. They waited. Pickett raised an American flag, not as a challenge, just as a formality. And on the other side of the waters, the British saw it, and they too responded, but not with fury, not with muskets. They sent ships, Royal Navy ships, under the command of Rear Admiral Robert Baines. The ships anchored. They did not fire. And on shore, British Marines arrived. No one rushed. No one shouted. They too raised their flag. Two flags, two camps, two nations. And between them, a meadow. A soft green meadow where the breeze passed over tall grass, where sheep once wandered, where a pig once rooted. Now the American and British soldiers were camped nearby, polite, wary, but calm. It was truly the most peaceful war in history. No shots were fired. No orders were given to charge. Instead, the officers wrote to his superiors. The British officers wrote to theirs. Then they waited. The letters would take days, sometimes weeks. Sailing to Vancouver Island, then across oceans, to Washington, D.C., to London. The officers on San Juan Island spent their days reading and rereading the same letters, wondering what would come next.
But what came next was more of the same. No reinforcements, no battles, just more waiting. They walked the island, they drank tea, they watched the sky change color, gray to lighter gray, to the soft golden light of evening. There were stoves set up, tents gently flapping in the breeze, and even the occasional shared conversation. Because the officers, British and American alike, were gentlemen, trained in the art of war, but not eager to practice it. They dined, they discussed, they measured distances with quiet curiosity. And so the boundary crisis between the U.S. and Britain settled into the strangest of patterns: a war with no movement, a military presence without a purpose. On some days, the British Marines rowed boats just offshore. On others, the Americans drilled quietly on a patch of flat land, not for battle, but because it gave them something to do. Even the soldiers began to relax. There were games, camp chores, letters home. One American wrote, "There is nothing to report. The British remain polite. We remain ready. The pig, alas, is still dead." And that, dear listener, was the tone of the time. This was the Pig War of 1859. Not a war of blood, not a war of conquest, but a no-shots-fired war. An uneventful military standoff. 2 camps, 2 flags, 2 sets of officers, and one great question: who owns San Juan Island? No one, it seems, was eager to answer. Even Admiral Baines in his letters urged calm. He refused to escalate the matter. He saw the risk of war and chose to wait. So the men waited too. They stood watch over an island where no threat arrived, where the biggest excitement had already passed, with the pig. There were no shouts, only sighs. There were no battles, only boredom. Still, both sides remained. Neither would withdraw. Not yet. Because the dispute over San Juan Island was now official, even if it wasn't active. And so the soldiers wrote in their journals. They counted sheep. They brewed tea. They cleaned their boots. And they looked across the meadow at men just like them, doing the same thing. It was, truly, a slow war. A war of observation, of politeness, of waiting. And now, dear listener, we wait too. We wait with them, as the days grow longer and the skies stay overcast, and nothing urgent occurs. This truly was the beginning of an ending. The pig was gone. The soldiers had arrived, and now they settled in. Let's join them for a time. Let's sit quietly in the camp and experience the long, uneventful days that followed. Let us now move on to a chapter of pure stillness, the uneventful military encampment. And so the soldiers stayed. On San Juan Island, beneath the slow-turning sky, the camps became routine. Nothing urgent, nothing loud, just presence. The Americans pitched their tents near the southern edge of the island, a soft stretch of land with low grasses, gentle slopes, and a view of the sea. Captain Pickett and his men went about the business of waiting. Across the water, the British remained anchored. Their ships bobbed softly in the current. Sometimes they sent a boat ashore.
No schedule,
Sometimes
no tension,
they didn't.
just patience. This was now a place of stillness, a chapter in the Pig War of 1859 where time passed like fog, silent, thick, unchanging. In the American camp, the soldiers established routines. Morning drills, done without passion. Midday meals, biscuits, beans, sometimes fish. Evening walks near the tree line. And every night, the same quiet watch beneath the stars. They wrote letters home. The British are near, but do not approach. No sign of further pigs. Their handwriting was neat. Their tone, bored but calm. Over on the British side, things were much the same. The Marines polished their boots, tended to their uniforms. Some practiced marching on the deck. Others took to fishing in the quiet bay.
On rare occasions, an officer might peer through a spyglass across the channel. What did he see? Tents, smoke rising gently from cook fires, men moving slowly, just like them. It was, in every way, an uneventful military standoff. There were stories told in the evenings, mostly the same ones, repeated gently. Stories from other posts, other conflicts, but none quite like this. Because here, there were no orders to fight. There were no enemies in sight. Just the memory of a pig and the soft murmur of waves against the shore. The camps grew familiar. The paths between tents were worn smooth. Each soldier knew the rhythm of the wind, the curve of the hills, the rustle of leaves overhead. Days were long, nights were longer. Sometimes, when the wind was just right, one side could hear the other, a faint laugh, the clang of a pan, the low notes of a harmonica drifting across the bay. There were no threats exchanged, no provocations, only distance and silence. The Americans planted small vegetable patches near their tents. The British built makeshift benches along the rocky shore. Someone, no one remembers who, started referring to the American camp as Camp Peace. The name stuck. This was, after all, the most peaceful war in history. Even the animals returned. Birds nested in the trees again. A pair of foxes were seen darting through the underbrush. And sheep, once afraid of the sudden appearance of humans, wandered close once more. The land healed. The air was calm. There were no parades, no speeches, just the quiet ticking of days. One American soldier, Private Harris, wrote in his journal, "We have not moved in weeks. The grass has grown tall around our supplies. The British sent us tea. We returned the gesture with apples. All is well." And it was. Occasionally, a civilian passed through, a fur trapper, a merchant. Even a priest once stopped to offer blessings to both sides. No one was turned away. No one was stopped. This was not a battlefield. It was a misunderstanding. A quiet moment stretched longer than anyone had expected. A disagreement left unresolved, but without any real desire for resolution. And so it went. The Americans repaired their boots. The British mended their sails. And everyone waited for word from somewhere else, Washington perhaps, or London, where decisions were made slowly, if at all. This boundary crisis between the U.S. and Britain was by now part of daily life, a backdrop, a quiet presence, and still no shots were fired. The no shots fired war continued, without fanfare. In the evenings, the Americans would watch the clouds change color. Pinks, oranges, muted grays, then darkness. The British often lit lanterns along the decks of their ships, tiny dots of gold on the dark water. Peaceful, predictable. There was nothing to report, but every man kept watch.
In the back of every mind, there was still the pig that had started it all, the pig that almost caused a war. And now, with so much calm, it seemed strange to remember that it had ever been controversial. But history, as it turns out, is full of such contradictions. And so we stay here, in this quiet moment, among the tents, the flags, the weary, patient men. Because even in its stillness, the Pig War of 1859 tells a story of restraint, of repetition, of quiet days and quieter nights. Let us now go deeper into those nights. Let us walk slowly through the passing weeks where nothing changed and nothing needed to. Let us continue with waiting and writing letters. By now, the camps were settled. The flags still fluttered in the breeze, one British, one American. The men had grown used to the stillness, and so they did what people often do when there is nothing to do at all. They wrote. The quiet middle of the Pig War of 1859 was not filled with strategy or suspense. It was filled with ink and paper and the steady scratching of pens across pages.
Each day, officers sat at rough wooden desks, usually made by hand from nearby trees, and wrote reports. Very long reports about very little. There were reports on rations, reports on weather, reports on the behavior of men who had done almost nothing. They described the wind. They noted the clouds. They recorded the exact time tea was served. And then they sent those letters across the water, to headquarters, to governors, to generals far away who were waiting for news, but not expecting anything important, because there was nothing important to tell. One letter from Captain Pickett read, "The British remain cordial. The encampment is quiet. We observe them observing us. The pig is buried." Another officer wrote to London, "The Americans have made no aggressive movement. The matter remains in limbo. Recommend continued observation." And so the words floated back and forth, carried by messengers on horseback, by small boats rowing slowly through the channel, by ships that took days, sometimes weeks, to reach their destination. It was the 19th century. There was no email, no phones, just ink, parchment, and patience. The soldiers, too, wrote letters too, not to generals, but to home, to mothers, to wives, to sweethearts. Letters filled with boredom, mostly, but also reflections, thoughts on the beauty of the island, the strange silence of a war without war. One private wrote, "It is strange being here. We are soldiers with no enemy. Our tents are dry, our food is plain. The British camp nearby, but they do not bother us. I think I have memorized every tree." Another said, "It is peaceful here. I have not cleaned my rifle in 4 days. No one minds. The men play cards. One sings at night. We all miss home, but at least we are not fighting." The letters were read aloud in homes far away. Families gathered to hear them. Some laughed at the absurdity of it all. Others simply smiled, thankful their sons were safe. Because, make no mistake, in the Pig War of 1859, safety was the standard. Danger was only theoretical. No shots fired, no charges made, no hills taken or lost. Only waiting and riding. Even the local animals grew accustomed to the soldiers. A deer was seen grazing near the edge of the American camp. Birds nested in the rafters of British supply sheds. Life moved on. Sometimes one side would send a letter to the other, usually something simple. "We noticed your flag is tattered. Would you like to borrow fabric?" "One of our men found a British button on the path. Shall we return it?" Yes, this really happened. In this most peaceful war in history, the enemy was not the man across the field, but boredom, fog, and the long stretch of time itself. Some soldiers read books. Others played games with stones and sticks. Someone, it is said,
Perhaps
tried
in
to
honor.
carve a pig from
Perhaps
driftwood.
in boredom. But even that little wooden pig disappeared one day, perhaps taken by a curious fox, or claimed by the wind. And still the letters continued. Word reached Washington, word reached London, and both sides said, more or less, "Let us not make this worse." No orders to attack, no plans to retreat, just a decision to wait. The soldiers continued their slow routines. In the morning, breakfast and drills. At noon, chores and naps. At dusk, letters written by lantern light. The ink smudged, the handwriting crooked, but the thoughts inside were clear. We are here. Still, all is quiet. And really, that is the story. No great action, no sudden change, just the soft passage of time. As the dispute over San Juan Island drifted into months of sameness, it became clear that no one wanted this to be anything more. The boundary crisis between the U.S. and Britain had become background noise, something to acknowledge, but not to act on. Still, they waited. And as they waited, they wrote.
They wrote about the weather. They wrote about the trees. They wrote about a pig, now long gone, but never quite forgotten. They did not know they were part of the Pig War of 1859. That name would come later, with hindsight and humor. To them, it was simply duty and letters. So let us sit with them now, beside a candle's flickering glow, listening to the quiet scratch of a pen, feeling the cool air drift through canvas walls, and knowing that not much else would happen. This was, and remains, a moment of history where everything stood still. And now, dear listener, we move forward, not with speed, but with softness, from the letters to the days that all looked the same. Let us now wander into the months of boredom. Time passed, as it always does, but more slowly, it seemed, on San Juan Island. By now, both camps, British and American, had fallen into rhythm. Not a rhythm of war, not a rhythm of urgency, but one of waiting, of watching, of writing, of boredom. And yet, it was a soft boredom, not the kind that frustrates, but the kind that rocks you gently, like a ship in calm waters, with nowhere particular to go. This was the season of sameness, the long middle of the Pig War of 1859, when nothing happened and nothing needed to. The soldiers had memorized the shapes of nearby hills. They could tell the hour by the quality of fog. They gave names to rocks and trees. A stump outside the American mess tent was known simply as Old Jack. No one knew why. They just agreed. On the British side, a worn trail near the shoreline was called the Queen's Walk. It led nowhere, and yet it was walked daily. These were men trained for war, and yet their greatest daily challenge was deciding which pair of socks to dry first. Each morning was like the one before. They rose, they stretched, they looked to the other camp, and saw that it, too, had risen. No surprises, no battles, only steam from kettles and quiet greetings between men who would never fire a shot. It was peaceful, monotonous, beautiful in its own uneventful way. The island, too, seemed to settle. The trees no longer stirred in alarm. The grass no longer bent under hurried boots. Everything
The Americans
moved
played cards.
slowly.
The British repaired ropes. A rumor started that someone on the American side had brought a fiddle, but no one ever heard it played. The sheep, those quiet, watchful witnesses to the pig's original trespass, had returned. They wandered freely, unbothered by flags or nations. And the weather remained, as always, indecisive. Days began with mist, then lifted slightly to drizzle, then cleared just enough to see the outline of the other camp, still there, still calm. On one particularly uneventful Tuesday, an American private counted how many times a British soldier scratched his head in a single hour. The answer, according to his log, 14. This was the level of observation. This was the pace of the war. It was, without question, an uneventful military standoff. And still, the phrase, the Pig War of 1859, had not been coined. To those present, it was simply this: the waiting, the watching, the great stretch of sameness. But even in boredom, there were patterns. Traditions emerged. The Americans marked Sundays with silence. The British rang a soft bell each morning, just once. Sometimes smoke from both camps would rise in identical spirals, as if even the fires had grown used to one another. At dusk, men would sit near the edges of their respective boundaries, cups of tea in hand, looking outward, not speaking, just being. There was no hostility, only habit,
A kind of mutual politeness had formed, an unspoken agreement. We are here, you are there, and neither of us wishes to move. A few men made sketches of tents, of trees, of pigs drawn from memory. One drawing, sent home by a British sailor, depicted the infamous animal sitting on a throne of potatoes. It was titled simply, "The Pig Who Ruled Us." And in a way, it was true. The pig, long buried, was still present, not in form, but in spirit. The pig that almost caused a war was now the only reason the war existed at all. And so they endured. The months passed, one much like the last. November faded into December. Then came January. Then February. Even the seasons seemed to pass without distinction. Winter brought less snow than expected. Spring arrived with little fanfare. The British cleaned their uniforms. The Americans swept paths between their tents. Neither side had anywhere else to be. The dispute over San Juan Island had no conclusion in sight, but no escalation either, and that was just fine. From the outside, perhaps, it seemed absurd, but to the men who lived it, it became routine, predictable, comforting even. One American officer was heard saying, "I've grown rather fond of this place. I should hate to see it disturbed by diplomacy." But diplomacy was coming, eventually, slowly. For now, the months stretched on, like a nap that refuses to end, like a book that keeps repeating the same sleepy page. And so the soldiers of the Pig War of 1859 continued, not to fight, not to win, but simply to be. As always, there was no rush. The world turned slowly. Nothing truly urgent occurred. And now, dear listener, we too may stretch out our legs, breathe deeply, and enjoy the lull between history's louder moments. Because, up ahead, diplomacy waits, not with force, but with formality. Let us now follow the path of parchment and patience into the next gentle phase, the diplomatic delay. By now, the soldiers had grown accustomed to waiting. So had the island. So had the sea. But in distant cities, where carpets muffled footsteps and desks creaked beneath the weight of too many reports, another kind of waiting had begun. Diplomats. They were, in many ways, the ideal characters for a conflict like the Pig War of 1859. Cautious, careful,
The matter of the dispute
extremely
over San
fond
Juan
of paper.
Island had arrived on their desks many months earlier, stacked between other curiosities of empire and expansion. And yet, there was no hurry. The United States had its own distractions. In the late 1850s, the country was already feeling the quiet rumble of things to come. Internal divisions, sections drifting apart, a great reckoning on the horizon. A pig and a potato garden on a misty island? Not exactly a priority. Britain, too, was focused elsewhere, its empire stretching vast and wide. Its navy deployed in places far more urgent than the calm waters near Vancouver Island. So the letters from San Juan, the ones reporting boredom, not battle, were read, acknowledged, and filed. But still, protocol required action. And so, a committee was formed, then a subcommittee, then a meeting to schedule further meetings. Maps were studied, speeches were drafted. Old treaties were retrieved from shelves and unrolled gently onto polished tables. The Treaty of Oregon, signed in 1846, had, after all, caused the confusion. It declared the boundary between the United States and British Canada should run along the 49th parallel to the middle of the channel which separates the continent from Vancouver's island. A reasonable idea, except there were two channels, Harrow Strait, Rosario Strait, and between them, like a shy child caught between quarreling parents, San Juan Island. Which channel was meant? Which map was accurate? And, most importantly, whose pig had the right to eat whose potatoes? These were the questions pondered over tea, by men in waistcoats, surrounded by books. The pig itself was, by now, long gone, but the paperwork it inspired continued to grow. There were proposals, counter-proposals, petitions, and pauses. Every document took weeks to prepare, then more weeks to deliver, and still more weeks to read and respond. This was not the fast age. It was the slow age. Letters crossed oceans on steamships. Replies returned the same way. By the time one side asked a question, the other side had often forgotten what the topic was. Still, the tone remained civil, always civil. This was not war. This was etiquette in slow motion. No one wanted to be the one to escalate. No one wanted to be the reason a pig turned into a battlefield. And so the diplomacy dragged on, like a foggy procession. One foot, then the other. No real destination. One American ambassador reportedly described the conflict as a matter of dignity wrapped in potatoes buried beside a pig. The British Foreign Office replied, politely, quite. Months became a year, then another. Back on San Juan Island, the soldiers remained in place, still waiting, still writing, still peaceful. They heard rumors of negotiations. They saw no change. Sometimes a message would arrive from Washington or London, saying only, "The matter is under review." And that was enough. The two sides on the island had long since abandoned the idea of confrontation. They held to their positions, but only out of habit. This boundary crisis between the U.S. and Britain had settled into something almost meditative, a contest of patience, a war of endurance, not between armies, but between clocks. Time ticked on, and on, and on. One American private noted in his diary, "I suspect that the island doesn't even know we are arguing over it. The trees seem indifferent." The British had begun planting flowers near their tents. The Americans carved wooden birds from driftwood. One man grew a beard so long it earned its own nickname, the Colonel. And still, the diplomats deliberated. At one point, the idea of joint occupation was proposed. It was received with a shrug, because, in truth, that's what had already happened.
But no one had advanced. The status quo was working. So they formalized it. Joint occupation. American and British forces, side by side, on a small island in the Pacific. Neither claiming it, neither abandoning it. And so the Pig War of 1859, this no-shots-fired war, this uneventful military standoff, continued into its final act, very slowly. Eventually, the matter was referred to arbitration, and not just any arbitration, but to the Emperor of Germany. Yes, Kaiser Wilhelm I would decide. But even he took his time. Years passed. The camps remained. The sheep grazed. The war that had never really begun continued to not begin. And so we pause here, in this long diplomatic delay, where time itself seemed to stretch thin, where even the clouds seemed to linger a little longer, not quite ready to rain, not quite willing to clear. It was peaceful. It was polite. It was perfect for sleep. And now, dear listener, we are nearly at the end, not of history, but of this very sleepy chapter within it. Let us now stroll into its conclusion, not with battle, but with an agreement. Let us continue, gently, into the resolution that took years. By now, the camps had weathered many seasons. Canvas tents were patched. Fires were lit out of habit, not necessity. Soldiers came and went, quietly, gently, replaced by others who took up the long vigil on this small island of stillness. The dispute over San Juan Island, still unresolved, drifted like the clouds above, sometimes thick, sometimes clear, but always there. And so it was that the Pig War of 1859 entered its later years. Still no shots fired, still no lines redrawn, Still no one quite certain who San Juan Island belonged to, but no one eager to press the matter, because things were fine, just as they were. The Americans kept their little garrison near the southern hills. The British stayed at their post on the northern end. A narrow stretch of land and time between them. 2 flags, 2 camps, 1 island. The middle ground became a place for quiet meetings, shared greetings, occasional small talk. Some said that the officers began exchanging gifts, a box of cigars here, a bottle of scotch there. One report, unconfirmed but often repeated, claimed that an American officer and a British lieutenant once played chess together on a crate between the camps. The game ended in a draw, naturally. The war was not cold, but not warm either. It was tepid, comfortable, almost forgotten by the world around it. But not entirely, because eventually diplomacy stirred again, ever so slowly. In 1871, yes, 12 full years after the pig incident, both nations agreed. Perhaps it was time to settle the matter, not with rifles, but with reasoning. The United States and Britain signed the Treaty of Washington. In it, among other things, they agreed to submit the San Juan boundary dispute to international arbitration, and not just any arbitration, to the German Emperor himself, Kaiser Wilhelm I, a man with no stake in pigs, potatoes, or Pacific Islands, a neutral judge, a distant voice, perfect for settling the quietest war in recorded memory. And so the question that had loitered for over a decade was handed to Germany. The Kaiser took his time. He formed a commission. He studied maps. He read letters from long ago. He may or may not have heard about the pig, though surely someone mentioned it. His decision came in 1872, 1 year after the treaty, 13 years after the pig, 26 years after the original Oregon Treaty that left the channels in question.
San Juan Island would belong to the United States. Not with fanfare, not with speeches, but with a quiet document signed in Berlin. And so it was done. No one protested. No one cried out. The British, polite as ever, accepted the verdict, and they left. Their camp, orderly, well-kept, and undisturbed by time, was packed with care. The last detachment of Royal Marines boarded their ship. There was, reportedly, a wave from the deck, and then they were gone. The Americans stayed. A few new signs were posted, a few notes filed in Washington, but otherwise, the island was just the same. The sheep grazed, the trees stood quietly, and the fog rolled in as it always had. And so the Pig War of 1859 came to an end, not with cannon fire, not with retreat, not even with a handshake, but with a letter and a sigh, a resolution that took years, resolved by patience, by paperwork, by letting time do the talking. It is perhaps one of the few wars where both sides could say, that went rather well. No one died, except the pig. No towns burned. No scars were left. It was, in every sense, the most peaceful war in history. Even now, if you visit San Juan Island, you can see where the camps once stood. Both preserved. Both quiet. A walking path connects them. There are plaques, and a small memorial to the pig. Tourists smile. Children giggle at the idea, when a pig started a war. And yet, it's true. The pig that almost caused a war is remembered not for destruction, but for the way it brought two nations to the brink and gently pulled them back. There is something sleepy about that, something reassuring, that even in a world full of louder stories, there can be one like this, where time moved slowly, people stayed calm, and reason prevailed. Let us hold on to that. Let us drift with it now, into the quiet reflection that comes at the very end, into the pig that became a legend. So now we reach the quiet twilight of our tale.
The tents are long gone. The soldiers are long home. The letters, once so carefully written, have yellowed or been lost. Even the decision, signed by Kaiser Wilhelm I, rests quietly in archives, rarely read, rarely remembered. But the pig? The pig remains. Not in body, but in legend. Because somehow, some way, this quiet episode, the Pig War of 1859, never quite vanished. It lingered. It whispered. It made its way into books, into classrooms, into campfire stories and museum plaques. It became, oddly, beloved. A war that wasn't. A dispute with no real battle. A moment in time when restraint, boredom, and a deep mutual unwillingness to fight became a cause for quiet celebration. And at the heart of it all was a pig. A pig who did not know it was making history. A pig who did what pigs do. It wandered, it rooted, it followed its nose. And, in doing so, it stepped into a potato garden and into the long, slow pages of history. The pig that almost caused a war. To this day, the story is retold, gently, fondly,
Beneath the humor,
often with a
there
chuckle.
is something soothing, something rare. A reminder that not every conflict has to end in disaster. That sometimes people pause and think and choose patience over provocation. The Pig War of 1859 is, in the grand sweep of history, a very small thing. But it is a perfect small thing. It shows us that nations, two great powers with guns and ships and uniforms, can stand face to face and do nothing. And in doing nothing, they choose peace. San Juan Island still exists, of course. Its trees are taller now, its trails are quieter. But the spirit of stillness remains. The British camp, known today as English Camp, is preserved. So is the American camp. Visitors walk between them, just as the sheep once did. There are no soldiers now, just docents and signs, and one small bronze pig statue standing where history once paused. Its eyes are wide, its snout is lifted slightly, as if still sniffing the air for potatoes. Children pat its head. Tourists pose beside it. But few truly understand what it represents. Not just an animal, not just a war, but a choice. A choice to wait. A choice to think. A choice to let time, not bullets, carry the day. And that, dear listener, is why we remember. Why we whisper the phrase again and again. The Pig War of 1859. It sounds like fiction, but it wasn't. It was real. It was a boundary crisis between the U.S. and Britain. It was the most peaceful war in history. It was a no-shots-fired war. It was a moment of pure, perfect stillness. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes it so restful to remember. It gives us permission to slow down, to sigh, to step away from conflict, and do nothing at all. Because sometimes the best resolution is no action. And so, as we close this final chapter, let us thank the pig, the soldiers, the letter writers, the Kaiser, the trees, the sheep, and even the fog, for reminding us that history can be quiet, that stories don't have to roar. They can whisper, they can lull, and sometimes they can help us sleep. Now, dear listener, close your eyes if you haven't already. Let the story settle gently around you, like a soft wool blanket at dusk. There are no more maps to consult, no more names to remember, no more camps to guard. Just the echo of hooves long faded, the flutter of flags long folded, and the slow, sweet silence that follows a war where no one fired a single shot. Eventually, it all faded into history. The pig was long forgotten, but the quiet remained. And with no battles, no noise, and no more pigs, the world simply moved on.
And now, dear friend, so may you. Sleep softly, sleep soundly, and dream, if you wish, of a little pig on a peaceful island who made the world pause. Good night. And so, the long and gentle story of the Pig War of 1859 comes to its final breaths. We began with a pig rooting in a potato garden, a small creature with no understanding of borders, flags, or diplomacy. And from that moment of winking innocence, we followed the slowest of spirals into history's most peaceful war. The dispute over San Juan Island could have been a spark, a warning shot, a first cannon blast in a wider, wilder war. But it wasn't. It was, instead, an uneventful military standoff, marked by caution,
Both
paperwork,
sides,
tea,
British and
time.
American, stood ready. But not too ready. They showed restraint as the fog rolled in. As months turned into years, it became a war defined by waiting, writing, staring across the bay, boiling water for tea, sharpening pencils more often than sabers. Not a single person died. Not a single shot was fired. Except, of course, at the pig. The pig that started it all. The pig that almost caused a war. And so we come to the part of the story where everything just stops. No battle to recount. No heroes or villains to name. Only a mutual understanding, drawn out over many quiet years. Eventually, as we heard, a resolution was reached. San Juan Island would go to the United States, decided by the distant wisdom of the German Kaiser. And the British, with dignity and care, left as politely as they had arrived. The American troops stayed a little longer. Then they, too, faded away. Now the camps are still. Grass has grown where flags once flew. The sheep, always neutral, continue grazing. And the pig? The pig is long gone, buried in the soil where it once searched for food, unaware of its diplomatic career. But its memory lives on, not as a monument to violence, but as a symbol of absurdity, of quiet, and of how peaceful history can be when people choose stillness over struggle. You see, not every story needs fire and fury. Sometimes the softest stories hold the deepest comfort. Because while we often fall asleep to tales of kings and conquests, there is something even more restful in a story where nothing happens at all, where the world turned slowly, where nothing truly urgent occurred, where everything simply waited. And maybe you feel that stillness now. Maybe your eyes have grown heavy, your breath slower, your mind quieter. That was the goal, after all, to bring you gently to this moment of calm, a moment where we remember that history isn't always loud. Sometimes it hums. Sometimes it rustles like leaves in the San Juan breeze. Sometimes it just exists. And in that space, we can rest. Eventually, it all faded into history. The pig was long forgotten, but the quiet remained. And with no battles, no noise, and no more pigs, the world simply moved on. So now, dear friend, you may do the same. Let your thoughts drift. Let the stillness take hold. There is no more to hear, no more to learn. Just peace. Just sleep. And if you dream, perhaps you'll walk those misty paths, past the tents, past the potato garden, and pause beneath the tree where the pig once stood. Not to fight, not to flee, but simply to be. Softly, slowly, steadily. Good night.